You feel it in your chest before you can name it. That specific tightness that settles in after you've smiled and said, "It's fine," for the 100th time, even though it isn't. You covered for someone at work who never once looked up to say thank you. You stayed quiet at that dinner table when the joke landed at your expense and everyone laughed, and you laughed too, because what else do you do? You answered the phone at 11 at night for someone who hasn't asked how you're doing in months, but needed something, so here you are, available as always. And you told yourself, this is what good people do. They give, they absorb, they forgive. But here's what no one warned you about. There is a difference between being generous and being erased. And some of us have been crossing that line for so long, we can't even see it anymore. Friedrich Nietzsche spent his life studying what happens to people who mistake self-sacrifice for strength. He had a name for it, the slow collapse of someone who keeps giving their dignity away, one unanswered disrespect at a time, until there's almost nothing left to defend, because they were never told that certain behaviors don't deserve your patience, they deserve your distance. Today, we're going to look at 6 of those behaviors. 6 specific patterns, deliberate, repeated signals that tell you exactly what someone thinks of your worth. And one of them is so ordinary, so woven into daily life, that most people absorb it for years without realizing it's quietly hollowing them out from the inside. We'll get there, but we start at the beginning, with the one that looks the least like disrespect and cuts the deepest. If this already sounds like something you needed to hear, consider subscribing. There's more where this came from. The first pattern doesn't arrive with raised voices or slammed doors. It arrives quietly, in the gap between what someone told you and what you later discovered was true. Deliberate deception, a choice. Someone looked at you, weighed the options, and decided that the truth was something you didn't need to have. Picture it. You find out a colleague rerouted credit for a project you carried through a carefully worded email sent while you were out of the room. Or a friend rewrites the story of a falling out, tells it to mutual people in a version that makes them look reasonable and leaves you looking unstable. The facts didn't change, the framing did, and the framing was chosen with you specifically in mind. Here's what Nietzsche understood about this, and it goes deeper than most people realize. He argued that the will to truth is one of the highest forms of regard one person can offer another. Honesty as a signal. I see you as someone who can handle reality. When someone deliberately withholds that, when they construct a version of events designed to serve themselves at your expense, they are telling you your rank. They are saying, without words, that you are not someone truth belongs to. That's not a mistake you forgive your way past. That is information about who this person has decided you are to them. Non-negotiable dignity means something specific here. It means recognizing that the moment someone makes a calculated choice to deceive you, the relationship has already changed, whether you acknowledge it or not. Your forgiveness doesn't undo their decision, it just removes the consequence. A person who knows what they're worth doesn't keep extending trust to someone who has already shown they'll spend it carelessly. Remember that, because the next pattern is subtler and in some ways harder to name. It doesn't lie to you about the world, it lies to you about yourself. Lying to you about the world is one thing, but the second pattern does something more corrosive. It lies to you about your own inner life. Emotional invalidation. The moment you try to say, "That hurt me," and the response is a sigh, a dismissal, an eye roll wrapped in words like, "You're overreacting," or, "Why do you always make everything so dramatic?" And here's the thing, you don't storm off, you go quiet, you sit with it, and slowly, almost without noticing, you start running your own feelings through their filter before you even let yourself have them. Picture the scene. You're in the kitchen, coffee going cold on the counter, trying to explain to someone why a particular comment landed badly. And before you finish the sentence, they're already shaking their head. "That's not what I meant. You're too sensitive. I can't say anything around you." Suddenly, you're defending your right to feel what you felt, which means you're no longer talking about what happened. You're talking about whether your reaction was valid. They've moved the ground under you, and you didn't even see it shift. Clinical psychologists have documented this pattern carefully. Repeated invalidation doesn't just make you feel unheard in the moment. It gradually rewires how much you trust your own perception. You become easier to manipulate, easier to dismiss. And the person doing it doesn't need to raise their voice. They just have to be consistent. The philosopher Aristotle wrote that self-knowledge is the beginning of all wisdom. And what invalidation targets specifically is that, your ability to know yourself clearly, to trust what you experience. Your feelings are not a rough draft. They are real data about real events. When someone makes a habit of crossing them out, that habit tells you something important about how safe your inner life is in their presence. And there's a pattern that looks almost like the opposite of this: loud, public, performed, which makes it somehow even harder to confront. The private dismissal erodes you slowly, but the third pattern does its damage in full view, and that's precisely the point. Public humiliation. Something far more calculated. The well-timed joke at your expense, delivered in front of people whose opinions matter to you. The comment that gets a laugh around a table while your face does the work of pretending you're in on it too. Here's the scene. You're at a gathering, maybe a work event, maybe a dinner with friends, and someone says something about you. Light enough to be deniable, sharp enough to land. Everyone chuckles. You smile, maybe even laugh first, because that's the fastest way to make the moment pass. And later, driving home, the windows fogged up, you replay it. You think, why didn't I say something? And the honest answer is that you didn't have time to think, only to react. And your reaction was to protect them from awkwardness at your own expense. Researchers who study social dynamics have documented this pattern clearly. Public mockery functions as a dominance display. It establishes hierarchy in front of witnesses, and the more times it goes unanswered, the more normalized it becomes, both for the person doing it and for everyone watching. Immanuel Kant argued that every person carries an inherent worth, not earned, not granted by others, simply present. To use someone's presence in a room as material for your own performance is, in Kant's view, a fundamental reduction of that person to a prop. And props don't get to object. But you are not a prop. And silence in that moment isn't grace, it's instruction. It teaches the room, and the person, what you'll absorb without response. Boundary enforcement doesn't always mean a confrontation. Sometimes it's just the calm, quiet choice to not laugh, to let the moment land differently. The next pattern we need to talk about operates with no audience at all. In fact, it tends to be most effective in private, because that's where the pressure really builds. Private pressure is slower than public humiliation, but it accumulates differently, like water finding its way through a hairline crack, patient, invisible, until one day the wall gives. Chronic boundary erosion. This is the pattern where no single incident feels serious enough to confront, but the cumulative effect is that you no longer recognize the shape of your own limits. You said you needed time before making decisions. They kept pressing. You mentioned you found certain conversations draining. They returned to those conversations every time, just persistently. And persistence, it turns out, is a remarkably effective tool for wearing someone down. Think about how it actually feels. You've stated something clearly, maybe once, maybe twice. Then it happens again, slightly repackaged, and you think, maybe I wasn't clear enough. So you explain again, more carefully this time, and the explanation is received, nodded at, and then quietly disregarded. Over weeks, over months, your original position retreats further and further from where it started, through repetition. This is what psychologists call boundary creep. Each small transgression lowers the threshold for the next, until you can no longer locate the line you originally drew. Nietzsche was direct about this. He believed that a person who cannot author and defend their own rules for living is not really living as themselves at all. They are living as a response to other people's pressure. And what boundary creep produces, over time, is exactly that. A version of you shaped primarily by what others were willing to keep pushing until you yielded. Here's what's worth remembering. A limit that dissolves under sustained pressure was never treated as a limit by the other person. It was treated as an opening position in a negotiation you didn't agree to enter. Self-mastery begins with the recognition that your stated limits are not invitations to persuade you otherwise. They are complete sentences. But as steady as this pattern is, there's one we haven't named yet that moves differently, not through pressure, but through warmth. Specifically, warmth that vanishes the moment you stop being useful. Conditional warmth is one of the most confusing things to sit with because it feels so real when it's present. Selective kindness, the version that appears precisely when someone needs something from you and evaporates just as precisely when they don't. This is the fifth pattern, and it's worth naming carefully because the person who does this isn't usually cold or visibly self-serving. They can be charming, attentive, even generous, right up until the moment you're no longer useful. Then the warmth switches off like a light, and you're left trying to figure out what you did wrong. Here's what it looks like in practice. Someone reaches out after weeks of silence. Warm message, genuine-sounding catch-up, maybe even a small kindness, and you feel it, that pull of connection, and you think, okay, things are good between us. Then they mention the favor, or the introduction, or the thing they need you to do. And somewhere underneath the conversation, you feel the shape of it. The way the warmth was the preamble, not the point. You help because that's who you are. And then they're gone again. Friedrich Nietzsche had a precise name for the structure underneath this. He called it instrumental relationship, where one person exists in another's world only as a means to an end. He considered it one of the more quiet forms of contempt, because it doesn't announce itself, it just operates. And here's the particular damage it does. It trains you to be grateful for the warmth, even when you know, in some quiet corner of yourself, that the warmth was contingent. Respect that arrives with a motive attached is not respect. It is an advance payment for a transaction. You are not a resource to be drawn on and left. And the clearest signal that someone has mistaken you for one is how quickly they find somewhere else to be when you have nothing left to offer. We've covered 5 patterns now. The one ahead is the one that hits differently, because it doesn't happen gradually. It happens all at once, in a moment you never see coming. The 6th pattern doesn't build slowly. It doesn't erode you over weeks or wear you down through repetition. It arrives in a single moment, and what it takes from you is something you gave freely, because you trusted that it would be safe. Betrayal of confidence. A deliberate choice to use what you revealed in a vulnerable moment as currency for someone else's benefit. Here's what that moment looks like. You told someone something real, something that cost you something to say out loud. Maybe it was a fear, a failure, a private struggle you hadn't shared with many people. You said it in the kind of quiet that comes when you feel genuinely safe with someone. And then later, days, weeks, sometimes months, you discover it traveled. Someone else knows. Or it reappeared in an argument, used as leverage. Or it was framed as a concern to mutual people in a way that made you look fragile, or unstable, or difficult. The worst part isn't the exposure. It's the realization that the safety you felt was a miscalculation. That the person you trusted had already decided, somewhere in that quiet moment, that what you shared belonged to them now. Friedrich Nietzsche considered loyalty one of the defining marks of genuine strength. Not loyalty as sentiment, loyalty as a commitment you keep even when keeping it costs you something. A person who betrays a confidence isn't just breaking a social rule. They are revealing that your vulnerability was, to them, an asset to be managed rather than a trust to be honored. And here's the thing about that revelation. Once it's visible, it cannot be unseen. You can forgive the act in the sense of releasing the anger, but extending the same depth of trust again, opening the same door, is not generosity. It is a failure to take seriously what you have already been shown. Earned distance is honesty about what the relationship has already proven itself to be. 6 patterns. And now we need to step back, because there's something underneath all of them, something that made each one possible. and it isn't them. It's a story you were taught to tell about yourself. So there's a story underneath all 6 of those patterns. A story about what kind of person you're supposed to be in order to be loved, accepted, kept close. And the story goes something like this. Good people absorb. Good people forgive quickly, explain generously, assume the best, and don't make things difficult. If someone hurts you, genuinely, repeatedly, deliberately, the virtuous response is to stay soft, to keep the door open, to be the bigger person. You've heard some version of this your whole life. It might have come from a parent, a teacher, a community, or simply the accumulated pressure of 100 moments where your discomfort was treated as the problem to be managed, not the behavior that caused it. And so you learned to manage yourself instead. You got very good at swallowing things, at reframing the behavior of people who repeatedly failed you as a reflection of their pain rather than their choices. Here's what Nietzsche saw in this, and why he found it so troubling. He called this kind of moral framework, the one that rewards self-negation and calls it virtue, a disguise. Not always a conscious one, but a disguise nonetheless. The idea that tolerating disrespect is somehow noble, that absorbing damage quietly makes you spiritually elevated. He argued this was simply the justification of people who had lost faith in their own right to make demands. And over time, he said, it doesn't make you kinder, it makes you smaller. Because here is what happens when you forgive patterns rather than isolated mistakes. You teach the people around you what you cost, and the lesson you've been teaching is that you're free. Free as in no consequence. Free as in this person will recalibrate their discomfort before they'll disrupt the relationship. That is not a virtue. That is a habit. And habits, unlike character, can be changed. What it actually takes to change this one, that's where we're going next. Changing a habit starts with seeing it clearly, just seeing it for what it is. The habit in this case is forgiveness as a reflex. Not forgiveness that comes after genuine reflection, after real accountability from the other person, but the automatic kind. The kind that kicks in before you've even finished processing what happened, where someone does something that costs you something real, and within hours, sometimes minutes, you're already busy constructing their defense for them. Telling yourself they didn't mean it, that they're going through something, that it's not worth the friction. That reflex isn't kindness. It's armor that you accidentally turned inward. Nietzsche wrote about what he called the sovereign individual, a person whose values come from inside, not from the fear of what happens if they demand too much, or push back, or refuse. The sovereign individual isn't harsh. They're just honest with themselves first, about what they've absorbed, what they've permitted, and what the real cost of that tolerance has been. Here's the question that reflex has been protecting you from. Not what will happen to them if I stop forgiving so quickly, but what has been happening to me? Because every time you rush to smooth things over, to reframe their behavior, to talk yourself out of your own reaction, you didn't just protect the relationship. You practiced a specific thing. You practiced treating your own pain as the inconvenience to be managed. And you've gotten very good at it. The change isn't dramatic. It doesn't require a confrontation, a speech, an ultimatum. It starts much smaller than that, with the willingness to let something land, to sit with what you actually feel before you start explaining it away. Non-negotiable dignity doesn't begin with what you say to other people. It begins with what you stop saying to yourself. And that brings us to the thing no one tells you. What life actually looks like on the other side of this. What changes, what you gain, and what you realize you were carrying all along. Here is what life looks like on the other side of that willingness to let things land. It doesn't look like hardness. It doesn't look like keeping people at arm's length or approaching every relationship with suspicion. It looks, actually, surprisingly, like the person you already are, generous, present, genuinely caring, except that the care is now directed somewhere it can actually do something. Toward people who have shown, through their behavior over time, that they know what to do with it. Because here's what you gain when you stop absorbing everything without response. You gain accuracy. You start to see people more clearly, not through the distorting lens of what you've already forgiven them for, not through the effort of constantly managing your own reaction to them, but clearly. And some of what you see is good. Some people, it turns out, were actually treating you with care all along, and you were so busy bracing for the next disappointment that you almost missed it. And some of what you see tells you something you needed to know a long time ago. Nietzsche called this self-overcoming, the process of becoming more honestly yourself, which sometimes requires releasing the version of yourself that was built around other people's comfort. Just a gradual, steady clarification of what you are willing to carry and what you are going to put down. The 6 patterns we've named, the lies, the dismissals, the public performances, the erosion, the transactional warmth, the betrayed confidence. None of them require you to become a different person to stop tolerating them. They require you to become more fully the person you already are. Someone who takes their own experience seriously enough to let it inform their choices. That is what the non-negotiable boundaries of self-respect actually feel like from the inside. Not a wall, a clarity. The kind that settles in quietly, the way a room feels different once you've opened a window that's been painted shut for years.